over the weekend during this men's retreat that I was telling you about, we had a ceremony where that song that we just played came up a couple times, and the intention of that whole weekend was to be around men and tap into our emotions and be around other conscious men. The whole retreat was about shedding, and it was called the shedding process. So I'm curious to know from your insights, what is humanity shedding right now at this time?
Yeah, that's really interesting, particularly because of the month we're in currently, in April. And particularly as we move through the eclipse, there are two really big astrological events in April. One was the total solar eclipse on the 8th, and the other was the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on the 20th. And many people were feeling, as we moved into the eclipse, myself included, that there was huge intensity as we moved into that for all kinds of reasons I won't go into. But there was a sense of weightiness and stuckness, and people were really sort of struggling to move ahead. And then as we moved through the eclipse, there was a feeling of shedding, of purging, of karmic release, which could have been your own trauma, your own karma. It could have been familial, it could have been ancestral, and it could have been, so far back you didn't even know what it was. You hadn't even tapped into it. But coming out of this eclipse, there was such a feeling of lightness that you're almost a different being. And in fact, I wrote a very simple social media post about it because I was aware that many people were feeling that. It was almost like we'd been reborn. For many people, they were shedding this ancient baggage, this ancient weight, and you didn't even have to identify it. You just knew, you felt the energy shift. And hundreds of people chimed in and said, yeah, I felt that too. I feel like a different person. I feel like I've been reborn. So that was a very big shift over the eclipse. And again, there was another one, more like a jump, at the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction around the 20th. And that's just the beginning of a whole 14-year cycle. But yes, there's a shedding of something that we don't even have to identify. But it's trauma-based, weighty, slowed us up, made it harder to see from a clearer perspective. That, for many people, has already gone. If it hasn't gone, you're on track. You're on your own divine timing, so don't worry. But everybody is shedding to kind of bounce up to a higher layer of light. That's what we're doing right now.
So Pam Gregory, officially welcome back on the Just Happened podcast. We had a beautiful conversation the first time around, and we just wanted to continue co-creating and weaving together. The first question I asked you in our first conversation was, what were you most excited about? And you said that you were constantly going down rabbit holes and you were really interested in where science bridges with spirituality, the physics of creation. And I also just wanted to know, what rabbit holes are you exploring right now that we can open the floor to?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because thank you, Emilio, and for this opportunity to come back and speak with you again. I very much respect your work with a very different audience that I wouldn't perhaps normally reach. So thank you for this opportunity. I think I'm getting absolutely fascinated by water and the fact that light is carried by water, and we are water beings, and water is everywhere in the universe. Plasma everywhere has water. It's impossible for life to exist without water. That's why astronomers get very excited if they find a planet that has some water on it, because it suggests that life can exist. And some of the water on our Earth that you and I are drinking on a daily basis is as old as 4.5 billion years old. And the ancient knowledge from Lemuria, from Atlantis, although even civilizations way before that, all of that knowledge is still carried in the water, because the water carries memory. So the water you drink, I drink, a horse drinks, a tree drinks, a slug, a snail, an African person, a Chinese person, we are all drinking the same water. So it's ultimately the great connector, which of course is wonderful for wiping out separation, polarization, racism, all of those things. But it's about the light, because there's a new quality of light that several people are talking about, and I'm sensing too, that is coming onto the earth and is a key ingredient for our evolution. And this light, and Nancy Rebecca talked about it in some detail, is silver and diamond. And silver represents the knowledge. No, correction. Silver represents the wisdom, and that's obviously Jupiter. And the diamond represents the knowledge, which is Uranus. And this light was going to surge on the 20th of April when we have the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And Nancy doesn't know any astrology. So they are able to bring, or that's the archetypal symbolism for bringing this higher quality of light to the earth. And this light, because it's a higher frequency, carries more information and more complex geometry. So this light is a big ingredient for our evolution. And that's why I felt the Jupiter, I hope I'm making sense here, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction was such a jump potentially for us in our consciousness, because it is shifting us closer to the light body with more information, with a more complex geometry. Now, there's also something here that links in, and I haven't got to the end of this rabbit hole, I'm just stuck halfway down it at the moment, that links with our hearts and the way that the heart, as our largest electromagnetic organ, is the portal to the cosmos, because that's the organ that really connects to the cosmos. And the light and the water in the heart, because of the microtubules in the heart and the vortex action in the heart, I believe is one of the processes by which we can more fully access this higher light and higher knowledge to help us expand into bigger consciousness and our multidimensionality. It's all about the heart, not as a Valentine's Day card, not as a pink puffy romantic love, as an electromagnetic portal to the greater cosmos. So I hope I'm making sense, because as I said, I'm not at the end of this journey yet, but there's something about the light being carried by the water. The water is ancient, the water holds all the knowledge. And the other thing is, if the water, and Veda Austin's work is beautiful with this, if the water is constantly, let's say, imprinted by our thought or our emotion in the moment, and Veda's work has demonstrated that amazingly, and it isn't just a kind of mirror response, there's an intelligence that's answering whatever she's asking. It isn't just, you're thinking of a staircase, here's a staircase. It translates her thinking. And so she is calling water God consciousness, which I very much believe. And I actually think that water could be everything. Water could be primary in a way that we've never really fully understood it before. Water is source, and Veda talks about that too, source with a capital S, not just a resource. Because I'm exploring some experiments at the moment which are suggesting really that because water is very impressionable, that when it's in its open areas on Earth of lakes and streams and rivers and reservoirs, because it's open to the skies, I've never said this publicly before, because it's open to the skies, it is being imprinted by the planetary pattern at the time. So it's just a thought I have that I need to, and it's actually being reinforced by some experiments in Germany that I'm trying to dig out. And if that's the case, and we ultimately drink that water as humanity, what's actually happening here, or could be happening, is that the water which is reflecting the current planetary pattern is interacting with our original birth chart pattern. And that's what I'm looking at with the birth chart and the transits. But could it be that water is giving us the physical explanation for astrology? Am I being clear here?
Yes. Yes.
This is a big thought for me. I mean, I don't know if it's a big thought for you, but it's a big thought for me. So, because, when I look at the birth chart and I put the transits around the outside and look at the interaction of the two, is that's actually physically what's happening day to day when we drink water, as we do every day. So it's that interaction of the current reflection of the planetary transits and what is embedded in us permanently in this lifetime as our birth chart. Now, also magnetite is believed around the pineal gland to be part of the explanation. But other than that, it's been a kind of hermetic principle of as above, so below. So I'm getting enormously excited here. Toot tell, all on my own. You're the first person I've spoken to about this, Emilio. It's hot off the brain. But the heart, because of the way that it structures the water with this vortex action, and is such an important electromagnetic vessel to connect to the cosmos, there's something about understanding about living from the heart in a more wise, conscious, and expanded way that's going to take us on the next jump. Have I made any sense at all?
100%, because I was just talking to a friend the other day and we were laughing because we were saying like, oh, our biggest ideas usually come when we're in the shower. And I just like blurted it out. I wasn't really thinking about it. And I just said, that's because water is a conductor of electricity and we are electrical beings.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a relationship with water and light, electricity and frequency. And what does all of that have to do with the Aquarian age that we're stepping into?
And the Aquarius glyph is two jaggedy lines. And, I've been saying for the last couple of years that anticipating when Pluto moved into Aquarius, and of course Uranus is the ruler of that, expanded by Jupiter about a week ago, that we would really start to understand our mastery of our frequency, of our thoughts, our emotions, and our frequency. And it's very imperative that we do that because the other obvious expression of that symbolism, Pluto in Aquarius, is controlled by technology. That's very clear to see where that timeline's going. So that's why it's very important that we achieve our mastery. And it's not hard to do. It's simple stuff, hugging a tree, bare feet on the grass, listen to all the simple stuff, laughing with a friend, hugging a child is simple stuff I talk about. That all of those little things lift your frequency. But if we are living consciously and wisely and we are aware through our day, what's my frequency? I'm checking in. What's my vibration? If it's dipping, why is it dipping? What can I flick? What can I flip to change that in a moment? But if we also have this underpinning of a greater understanding of light and frequency and water bringing back all of that knowledge from Lemuria and Atlantis, which I think is what's happening right now. Wow, what different beings are we going to become with all of that? It's a remembrance of all those gifts and abilities. And particularly what I love about Lemurian culture is everything was one. It was impossible to hurt another living being. I mean, I have huge love for animals anyway, but it's getting bigger and bigger, my love for animals. I feel with them that it would be impossible to hurt another living being if everything was one and we just felt it as a fractal of that one. There'd be no more war. There'd be no more polarity, separation, division, because we'd all be humming in our divine fractal expression of that oneness. So my feeling is, and I haven't talked to Vedra about this, I blurted it out with you there, Amelia, so I haven't even spoken to Vedra about this yet, but I'd love to investigate it with her because my sense is that water could be everything. Water is divinity. Water is everything that is created from it. There is nothing beyond the water but the water.
You briefly mentioned this very big conjunction with Jupiter and Uranus that is going on, just happened very recently. And it lasts for about, you say, 13 to 14 years. One thing when you brought up that conjunction is that we're going to go through an awakening of our Kundalini energy. And, in the Vedic sciences, they teach about how we have this cerebral spinal fluid that runs up our spine, which essentially needs water, salts, and minerals to be able to have that activation. So water in many ways is also a huge factor in us activating a deep part of our DNA and the new species, the new human that is arising. You call it the Homo luminous.
Absolutely. And as I understand it, that cerebral spinal fluid, and there's a wonderful Dr. Marrow who speaks about this, my understanding is that fluid is salt water. Now, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? So all of this is leading us down some very interesting journeys. And yes, I do think there will be a lot of, it wasn't just for that weekend, it was the beginning of a higher state of being, a beginning of a higher state of consciousness. So it's not like the whole world on the 20th of April had a Kundalini experience, but it brought in that possibility much more strongly for us from this point on, because many of us are making those jumps in consciousness, and it's down to your individual soul contract, your path in this lifetime. So if it hasn't happened to you yet, don't worry, you're still on track. But that kind of experience is going to become much more common from this point on, for sure. It's always about an expansion of consciousness when we have that conjunction.
Yeah. And just about a few weeks ago, everyone was talking about this solar eclipse on April 8th. And when I was looking into what Pam had to say about it, you mentioned that the last one we had was in 2005, which again was at 19 degrees of Aries. I did some further investigation of what else happened that day. I know that day you left your marriage of 19 years, but also it was the funeral of Pope John Paul II. And, almost 4 million people attended this event. World leaders, this whole ceremony happened at the St. Peter's Basilica. And, that really marks, I guess, a transition, like something happened around religion. And I think as we're stepping more into this age of Aquarius, you call it inner authority, sovereignty, I think our perception around religion will also change. Are you seeing many evolutions in that as well, in 100%. Our spiritual understanding?
Yes, 100%. And thank you for bringing that up. Because when we have a solar eclipse in Aries, particularly, a solar eclipse often, because the sun is blocked out, there's often a fall in leadership somewhere in the world, particularly
masculine leadership, right?
Masculine leadership, absolutely, because it's the sun and it's in Aries, ruled by Mars. Masculine leadership. So back in 2005, it was the Pope. But remember again, that wasn't just for one day. If I'm looking down the timeline this year, I think there are many potentials for falls in leadership. And the reason I'm saying that as well, apart from the solar eclipse in Aries, is that Pluto has been moving out of those last few degrees of Capricorn. It darts back in for its final last gasp from the 2nd of September to the 19th of November. And that is about power coming from the old order, the top-down vertical structure, the elite at the top, the poor people at the bottom. The rules, the regulations, we are telling the poor, ordinary people what to do. So whether you are looking at, in ancient times, it was the church, it was the monarchy. In these current times, it could be governments, corporations, institutions, but also the church, still the church, because that is a very traditional top-down structure. You've got an important leader at the top who is revered. So people are really referencing an external source of power, whether it's a prime minister, a president, a pope. It's an external reference of power. As Pluto moves increasingly into Aquarius, and on the 19th of November, it'll do that for another 20 years, this is a real beginning of a shift of the power to the people. And that's happened every single time if I look back to historical cycles. it was interesting. If I go back to the 1200s and Henry VIII, because originally England was all part of the Catholic Church, and Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, and the Catholic Church says you can't do that. So he said, okay, then I'll separate myself from the Catholic Church, and he set up the Church of England. That was a weakening of the church structure, the Catholic Church structure at that point. So wherever I look in history, when you get a transit of Pluto moving out of the end of Capricorn into the beginning of Aquarius, it's the weakening of top-down structures and external authority reference points and taking our power back. Whether you look at the US Revolution, the French Revolution, things I've talked about ad infinitum in the videos, there's this sense of, okay, now I understand my inner power and I'm stepping into it. We're not going to do that again.
And when we tap into that inner power, how does that, from an astrological perspective, how does that change the way we understand the higher dimensions in the universe? Because we would normally use religion as a sort of faith of, oh, there's something out there that's bigger than us. But when we put our power within us, how does that shift human understanding around what is beyond, what is out there, what we really are as dimensional beings?
Yeah, great question, because it's really back to this Hermetic principle of as above, so below. Because when I'm looking at a birth chart, in the same moment, I'm looking at a picture of the heavens at the moment of your birth, and I'm looking at your internal psyche. The birth of your cosmic journey from that moment. So I'm looking at inner and outer. And as you will know, Emilio, because I endlessly bang on about it, I'm very keen to move from this fated sense of astrology. Planets do things to you, and it's very fated and predictable. And that's why I'm pulling back from prediction a lot, to you are the embodiment of those planetary energies. They're part of your psyche, you're part of your psychology. This is the modeling clay or unique sheet of music that you've been given for this lifetime. So actually, if you follow authors like Paul Levy, the wonderful Buddhist author, he said there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there. Everything is coming from in here. And that's the path I'm encouraging people to go on, to have constantly the internal reference point rather than the external. Don't see, Pluto's the planet of powers being out there and controlling. It's in here. And you step into that as your center, your anchor, your radio dial, saying, no, I choose the day I have, the life I have. I choose. And Paul Levy and other similar Buddhist writers would say, all of this out here is simply our projected inner reality that we've created internally, and we're just putting it out, and the universe is mirroring it back to us as some kind of externalization. But actually, some people would say, there's only you here. It's kind of weird kind of thing, because I'm sure if you were sitting next to me, I could poke you and you'd be solid. But they say there is only you here. Everything else, everything's your perception.
Yeah. And we tend to limit ourselves a lot when we're outwardly focused only on our five senses. And it's almost like when we go within ourselves, we start training and developing new sensitivities. And you also talk about how there is a development of more psychic phenomena, psychic sensitivities going on in the world right now. What could you tell us about how that is developing currently?
Oh, I think a lot of people are feeling this, and feeling it quite quickly. And whether they're suddenly finding that they're more telepathic with other people, or their healing ability is stronger, or there's a greater sense of empathy, or, for me, I'm getting it with nature and animals, that I really feel I'm blending with nature. And I've always loved animals, but on my morning walks through the woods, I meet a lot of wild ponies and donkeys, and I feel I can chat to them a little more fully than I could before. I can kind of really feel, really sense where they're coming from, whether they're having a good day or a grumpy day. And so that blending, as we lose density and become the light body, that kind of blending with other life forms to ultimately realize we are all one, is what people are starting to experience. And And it's beautiful because it comes as a result of the expanded consciousness. It was always there. It was us that was limited. And so I talked a little bit recently about the 24th chromosome coming back online, which is really exciting. I don't know if you heard me talking about that, but apparently about 200,000 years ago, two of our chromosomes were kind of spliced together, number 2 and number 7. Greg Braden talks about this. And although there were benefits to that, we lost some of our multidimensional connection. That apparently is now coming back online. So not only are we developing this greater psychic sensitivity, which will manifest in very, very different ways, whether it's telepathy, healing, communication with animals, whatever it is, but our connection with the planetary bodies, even if they are in here, is going to become much greater. We're going to develop a much greater understanding of the whole universe, and dare I say, both with Pluto in Aquarius and Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, there is very likely to be a shattering of belief systems and a shattering of paradigms. Because whenever we've had this line up before, an obvious time was when Copernicus published his heliocentric theory in 1543. That was a complete shattering of a paradigm to tell people that, the Earth went round the sun and not the other way around, when they could see when they woke up in the morning, the sun came up and it moved around and it set over there. He exploded, he shattered a paradigm. These are the times that we are moving into with this expanded awareness and greater sense of multidimensionality. We're going to leave all of our beliefs, our views about the world, our views about our history, all of it, I think, is going to go to dust.
Yeah. And there's a very, very interesting phenomena right now where more and more people are beginning to not only remember memories of this lifetime from the past that have been, suppressed or not even allowed to resurface. That is coming up to the surface, and people are working through a lot of emotional woundings, a lot of traumas, whether that is through breath work or other practices. But then there are some people who are able to remember the totality of their past lives. And then they're all saying that this is happening simultaneously as well. So you had a very interesting past life experience, which you've shared a little bit before, but not on this podcast. I'm very interested to know, how did you begin to reactivate these memories within you? Because a lot of people are beginning to either spontaneously wake up to a memory that it's of theirs, but in a different body, a different time period. What was that initial experience for you when you first sort of remembered that?
Yeah, it was
lifetime?
amazing. And it was also happening at the time of an inverse lunar return. Anybody who inverse nodal return, anybody who knows anything about astrology or read my second book would understand it. But often it opens up past lives at that time. It becomes quite mystical. And I bought it. My mother had passed away. She'd left me a small inheritance. I'd always wanted to buy a house in France. And so I saw an ad in the paper I don't normally buy. And there was one house left on this site that was on the edge of a 10th century village. And it was, you bought off plan, as it were. So I flew down the next day. And I stood in the field with the sales guy. And I just thought, I've got to, this is home. And I actually said to him, this is home. I have to buy it. And he thought it's worn is the easiest sale I've ever had. But I bought a very small house looking out to the mountains, and I just adored it. I loved the land. I just adored it. But within a couple of years, things started to go wrong financially, typical story, and it became very difficult financially and legally. So I have a good friend who is a genius at clearing energy, my good friend Sandy Humby. And so she offered to come down with me and see what she could find in terms of this. And I'd had a sense of, because my love for the land was so strong, that I may have had a past life there. But have I got a little bit of time to talk about this? A few minutes?
Of course. Take all the time you need.
It was like a 4-day Harry Potter expedition. It's like a 4-day magic carpet ride. So before we got on the plane, she'd looked at a local map and said, your story begins at the Chateau of Terme. And I said, well, that's really funny because that's my favorite place in the entire world, but it's just a ruin. It's on a precipice in the middle of nowhere. She said, well, it's lighting up like a beacon. Your story begins there. But she said, firstly, on day one, we'll go to your French house that you've had so much trouble with. So we were walking around the little ancient village, and she suddenly stopped and said, this is where the massacre began. And I said, well, that's my front door. Literally, of the whole area, that was my front door. And she said there was a big massacre here, and you were the leader of the group of people who were massacred. And as we were crossing a tiny stream going into that little village area, she'd said to me, are you aware there are about 80 people, children, women, walking behind you? She said, they're not walking behind me, they're walking behind you because they know that you have come to release them from the trauma. Oh, wow. So she then built a ladder of light to release the people from the trauma of the land, of whatever the massacre was about. And I knew, and it'll be clearer when I explain day two, I knew that the houses had been built on consecrated land. There was a church there being built on consecrated land, so they had to get special permission. Anyway, that was day one, but I still didn't know the full story. So the next day we climbed up in the car, and Sandy is terrified of heights, and there's a kind of sheer drop into a gorge, and there's not a soul around for miles. And we're kind of going through hairpin bends up into the mountains. And it make a fantastic movie, actually. And we had to then clamber up. We had to climb up to this ruin. And she said, this is where you were the perfecti. You were the priest at this chateau. She said there was a siege by the Catholics. And historically, I knew that. I knew there'd been a siege from August to November 1210. I knew that from history. And the siege had gone on for months. And they were running out of water. But the biggest problem was when the water eventually came, the rain came in a deluge. There was a lot of animal waste in the water tanks, which were dry at that point, and everybody got dysentery within the chateau complex, the Chateau of Terme. And she said, in order to save the people, you led them over hill and dale, over mountains about 20 miles, and found a church where you told them they would be safe. And within a few months, Catholics found you, and you were all massacred there on the site of your house. You were all massacred there. But with her dowsing rod, she said, was Pam the head perfecti here at the Chateau of Terme in 1210? Yes. Got a very clear reading from the dowsing rods. And she actually took a photograph. I was going,
in awe, in shock.
Could not believe what was unfolding. But I realized that divine intelligence had waited 800 years for me to buy that house on that piece of land in order to release the trauma for all of those people who'd been massacred by the Catholics, and also for me. I was also buried there under the church. That was the site of the house. And so it was an extraordinary time. And, it just make a great movie because the two of us, mid-November, freezing cold, way up this mountain, with nobody around, doing this ceremony to clear the trauma. And she cleared the trauma from the land at the chateau, the ruin, and she cleared the trauma where my house was too. And I was the only person then, after 9 years of legal and financial struggle, to sell my house. And that released it. That was the clearing of the energy, and that released it.
And how did your life change after clearing like that ancestral or past life trauma that you had?
Yeah, it was really amazing, actually, because everything sort of lightened up, because it often does when you have a lunar return, a nodal return, because it's like an opening up of your past life, but also a clearing of it. Anything which has been leaking into this life and messing up this life can be cleared at those pivot point times. And so it was remarkable that it linked so clearly with the astrology. But yes, I mean, a lot of things cleared. You know, I'd left my marriage, and there was a lot of trauma around that. Cleared all of that to big health issues, big emotional issues, which I won't go into here. But yeah, it cleared a lot. It was like a clean slate. And I also know very clearly about another past life as well that I think has huge impact on this life in a much more positive way. But certainly, yes, there was a lot of trauma in that Cathar lifetime that my good friend Sandy cleared for me, and cleared the trauma for, you know, all of those other beings who were involved in that slaughter.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And it's really interesting because even in this past life regression space, when I study a lot the work of Dolores Cannon, and she talks about how some people are able to go back into a lifetime where they were off planet, different species, different race. Some might be Pleiadian, Arcturian, and then giving insights through as to which, you know, what happened in that lifetime and things like that. And in our first conversation, the energy of the Arcturians was very present, and a lot of people could feel that in the comments. We both felt it. So I was really curious because I didn't get the chance to ask you, when did your connection with the Arcturians start becoming conscious for you? Where did that start?
I think so many people have told me, actually. I mean, I can't put it down to my own perception, but so many people have said you've got very strong Arcturian energy. And very kind people have even sent me readings, unsolicited readings about that Arcturian energy. And I actually sit in this room in what's called a healing pod, an Orinoco healing pod. And it emanates, apparently by chance, Arcturian energy. And so, and because I understand that the Arcturians were very mathematical and analytical, and that's how I've come up through my astrology in a very kind of structured way, as you would learning a language in a very mathematical way. And so I think, yes, I really understand that resonance to the Arcturian frequency. I haven't experienced any Arcturian beings myself yet, but I fully expect to have that happen, that experience as we move forwards now. I think many people will have those experiences. But yeah, I feel very blessed for that. I mean, very blessed that anybody comes in. But you know, in that last conversation we had, so many people played back that the Arcturian energy was present, and so I have to credit them.
Yeah, and you even said that throughout maybe this June, July, we're going to see a lot of galactic news and communication resurfacing. So what does that have to do with the astrology? How did you come to that realization that we're going to see more of that being exposed into the mainstream?
Yeah, it's partly because both Uranus and the sign it rules, Aquarius, are being highlighted right now. Uranus because it's being expanded by Jupiter, and Aquarius because Pluto is in there for the next 20 years. And with whatever sign Pluto is in, it intensifies the energy. It acts as a catalyst for the energy. And both the planet Uranus and the sign Aquarius are to do with galactics, the foreigner, the maverick, the outsider. And whenever we've had strong Uranus transits, we've made greater discoveries about the out there. You know, about the cosmos, about the way the galaxy operates, about planetary motion, the day of the moon landing, and, you know, whatever you think about that. Nevertheless, it expanded our consciousness. There was an exact Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that day. And so if I track back, it's always been linked to some kind of out there experience historically. So, and I've set up, as you probably know, Emilio, an incredibly simple 15-minute meditation on a Sunday evening UK time for people just to magnetize in New Earth. More and more people are feeding back to me from that experience that hundreds of galactic beings are now joining us. They're very tall, they're very loving, they're very benevolent, and they are just cheering us on with our endeavors to bring in a more loving, compassionate, peaceful, and joyful world. And they just come in, boom. You know, people are just saying, boom, within a second, 7 o'clock, boom, on the dot. They're very prompt. and they arrive in the meditation. And I mean, dozens of people are feeding this back now. And if you think of the people who are channeling Palladian energy, Arcturian energy, I mean, they're all over YouTube, aren't they now? It's a much more common thing. And so I think it's very important, whatever other narratives come to us, that we recognize we are galactic beings. We're made of stardust. We know that. You know, the iron in our blood, the calcium in our bones comes from stardust. We've lived on other constellations. We've lived in other galaxies. So if there's any kind of story about, you know, little green men and how scary they are, that's not the case. You know, we are galactic beings. And that's another step into our sovereignty, recognizing that. So I think we're going to get some very exciting times through this year. We've got an activation of Uranus yet again in mid-July. There's a Mars Uranus conjunction, I think, yes, conjunction in July that's very strong, and further activations as we go through this year. And actually then 25, 26, some very big activations once Uranus starts to come into a trine at 120-degree aspect to Pluto, and that will bring in a lot, I think, from galactic connection, galactic news, galactic understanding. And if we look back to when those rare trines happened to Uranus, Pluto in the past, not only has a lot been discovered about light, we're going back to light now because Uranus is very linked to light as well, but it was an incredible time of creativity and discovery, if we go back to those times in the 1700s. So I think we have a lot to look forward to. And as long as we can stay on that pathway of excitement and discovery and love and magnetizing in new earth and keeping your spiritual blinkers on to some extent, saying, no, we're not going to go into fear, because you get more of what you think about all day long. And I think there's quite a big bifurcation happening right now. You know, if we are in love, we are creating more love every day in our lives. You get more of what you think about all day long. And that timeline is getting higher and higher. If you're in fear, that's a very different trajectory. And we can still see people existing in that lower frequency of fear, which is more about control, etc. And it's like two trains leaving a station. You can still see the other train at the moment, but quite soon those trains are going to take a very different route, and you will lose sight of that train on the other timeline, and we'll just be living fully in love in New Earth. I mean, that's how I see it. That's what I'm working on anyway.
Yeah. In this men's retreat that I was just a part of, the first day they told us, we didn't tell you we were going to do this, but we're going to take your phones for the next 3 days. And we're like, all right. So we give them the phones. And then on the last day, we had our ceremony. And the day before that, they said to prepare for the ceremony, we will be having a pure silent day. You know, we were all together. We took a 3-hour hike. No words were exchanged. And that really relates to your life lesson that you had when you were 26, around my age, when you did a martial arts course and you realized that the focus is our superpower. So how would you really hone that in for people?
Yeah, absolutely. Just lock on. Well, lock on to love, you know, point one, but lock on to what you want to manifest and create in the world. Now, manifesting abilities are going to get higher and higher as we move forwards.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of
Why?
It's part of this expansion of our consciousness, and our understanding of frequency is everything. But just 100% focus, no doubt. There's a very beautiful, simple book, quite funny book actually, called The Cosmic Ordering Service. And it's quite an old book, written in the 70s by a German lady called Barbara Mohr, M-O-H-R. And she uses a great analogy. She said, if you're going to a restaurant and you order a meal, you don't keep going into the kitchen to say, is it going to arrive? Or I might have changed my mind, or I think I prefer something else. You know, you put the order in and you absolutely trust that what you've ordered will be delivered to you, and it'll be wonderful. And it was a very good analogy of don't wobble. Don't wobble, don't doubt, don't wobble, don't change your mind. Stay, yeah, it's absolutely. And if you can take action, I mean, when I wanted to buy a French house, I had French paintings all over the kitchen, the kitchen decorated in that very typical French blue, electric blue and yellow. I imagined myself walking in the mountains there, which indeed I did. And within weeks, it was a really short time, I bought the house. So it's just a kind of locking on with no doubt that is what you're going to manifest. You're not going to wobble. You're not going to think, I'm too young, I'm too old, I'm too poor, I'm too, all of that unhelpful self-talk. You just absolutely trust that's going to come to you. And it works. And it really, really does work. And live it, in your imagination, because it's the imagination that will magnetize that experience to you. So in your imagination, you're walking in the mountains, you're buying French bread at the local patisserie, etc. You're living it. And the more you do that, the more it starts to take form and color as crystalline geometry in the plasma, and you just magnetize it much faster to you. And that's what we're doing in those simple 15-minute meditations to bring in new earth on a Sunday. Yeah.
I'd love to go a little bit deeper on what you mentioned about the crystalline and the plasma, the geometry. So what is that really, and how does that affect our manifestations in our life?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, according to the scientists, including people like Professor Robert Temple, who I've interviewed, he's written a great book called A New Science of Heaven. Brilliant, groundbreaking book about plasma. He's an expert on plasma. And he, along with many other scientists, say that 99% of our universe is plasma. 99%. So, you, me, Emilio, tables, chairs, sofas, houses, but also the invisible, what we think of just as air, and nothing is actually empty space. It's electromagnetically charged plasma, even though we think it's just empty space. 99% of it is plasma. So plasma is it's a kind of pre-matter form. It's electromagnetically charged. It can be a gas, a liquid, a solid, but it's essentially a pre-matter template. And your personal interaction with what you want to create with this plasma starts to take form as geometry. Now, if you are in fear, anger, hate, it's a very incoherent emotion, and you get a very asymmetrical, like Masaru Emoto's crystals, very distorted, unhelpful geometry in the plasma. The more coherent you are in your emotions, love, joy, peace, gratitude, etc., the more you get a coherent geometry, and it starts to appear as light. A kind of architecture of light. I was talking to Dr. Jude Currivan, the cosmologist, about this, and she confirmed this is what happens. So it's like an architect's plan, but it's made of light in the plasma because you're forming a crystalline structure. And Dr. Jude Currivan, because she's a mystic as well, she can see it, and she said it kind of sputters initially. It's when you're feeling really, this is going to come to me, it kind of sputters, and then we pull back and say, I don't know if I've got the money, I'm too old, I'm too young, and the light sort of collapses a bit, but we do it again, and we do it in a group. And the coherent geometry, the architectural structure of light, starts to become the foundation of what you then manifest in the world, whether it's individual or collective. So it's beautiful. Yeah. So it's actually physics. This is physics that we're dealing with. This goes beyond the astrology. And that's why it's so exciting. And because the Earth is moving through this area of space called the photon belt, which is very high frequency light, essentially. So it's very high frequency plasma. And plasma has a self-organizing ability. It potentially is coherent in itself. And so we have that's part of why I think our manifesting abilities are going to get so much stronger. Because if we can train our frequency in the ways we've been talking about today, train our frequency to be coherent, loving, locked on to what we want to manifest, and interact with this potentially self-organizing, high-frequency, crystalline light structure in the photon belt, everything is going to happen faster for us and better. as long as we stay in coherence.
Hmm.
Does that
I'm
make
almost,
sense?
yes, definitely. And I'm almost getting the insight that human emotions are the vehicle to creation. And
100%.
over the past weekend, in this retreat that I went to, only men, we're taught to hide our emotions, we're taught to suppress certain things, not cry, not hug each other. And we went into a space where we were allowed to safely feel not only the highest emotions available to us, like joy and happiness and laughter, but also the deepest emotions of sadness, grief, nostalgia, anger as well. So I was getting the insight as well of we have a spectrum of human emotions. And yes, it is true that when we are mostly in our joy, mostly in our love, we become more magnetic beings and we're more coherent. But if we have lingering lower emotions like anger, fear, or grief, or shame, and we tend to just say, oh, I'm just going to ignore that and focus on joy, then we're not fully processing the emotional scale. So in this weekend, we were able to feel the lower emotions so that they can be wiped and cleared from our system, and then we could be in joy and happiness and love. So it's like that's the insight of focus on the higher emotions, but also work through and move through the lower emotions so that you can, um, I guess, upgrade your manifesting potential.
Yeah, so you've lost the baggage, as it were. You shed that,
The
and
shedding process, yes.
absolutely, and which is where we started. So, and if you can feel in those positive emotions, as you know, from love, joy, gratitude, your heart toroidal field not only becomes more coherent, but becomes much larger and much stronger. And we know from the work of HeartMath that it's 5,000 times stronger than that of the brain, which is incredible. So although everything begins with a thought, which is the electrical impulse, it then becomes the emotion. Do we like that thought? Do we not like that thought? And it's the emotion, the magnetic wave, which magnetizes your future to you, magnetizes the next experience to you, because it's the heart that's electromagnetic in a much bigger way than the brain. So coherence is everything because it keeps every cell in your body much healthier. You infect other people with that coherence of love and joy. We infect each other with our energy like we catch a cold from people. And so you can sense when people enter a room, some of them, that, they just have this presence of love. They don't even have to speak. And that's where we all need to get to, really. I mean, there's a wonderful healer. I think he's called Bracho or something. He's Croatian, I believe. And his team arranged for about 1,000 people to turn up to an event if they need healing. And he doesn't speak. I don't know if he can or can't speak, but he just doesn't speak. He just stands in his presence and his love, and he heals people. And that's what we're going to, it's Characlo energy. That's what we're going to get to.
Mm. A new scientific discovery that you posted about was that there's even new species emerging, rare evolutionary events going on in the world. What is going on with that? What is that all about?
Yeah, really exciting, isn't it? Because I sort of anticipated with the astrology, with Uranus in Taurus, but also Haumea, the dwarf planet, being so strong, because she's about regeneration, that we'd start to see new species. And the two things that have come to light in really just the last few weeks, one was that there was a gigantic underwater mountain range that nobody knew existed just off the coast of Chile. And divers have gone down and they've discovered all kinds of new species in the sea moss and the algae, etc., which is just wonderful. And I think this can bring us new medicines and all kinds of things. And also, just I think yesterday or the day before, I was reading about something. It's an evolutionary leap that hasn't happened for 1.6 million years, I believe. And the last time it happened, that produced the evolution of plants on the earth. And it's really a splicing of two different organisms to produce what scientists are calling an organelle a completely different species with the splicing of these two organisms. And it's something that we're just on the brink of, but I think we're going to see a lot more. I think we are going to see so much about new species, because with the higher light frequencies, new life, new forms of life have to come from that new light. It can't be same old, because same old is crumbling, it's falling away. Anything that was not birthed of love is falling away. And so it has to be, if you follow the science, that new species will form from this new frequency of light coming in. It's hugely exciting, isn't it?
And is there a possibility that those new species are filled with consciousness to the level of humans? Because everything has consciousness. We shouldn't be so egotistical to think that we are the only species on Earth with consciousness. Everything has consciousness. But what if these new species that are emerging, because this new light is of such a high frequency, are coming in with the consciousness of humans or greater? And that also ties in with artificial intelligence, which is also a new species that is emerging on the planet.
Indeed. And I frankly think that the animals and nature are ahead of us. We're the tail end Charlies here. We're the barbarians. So animals, sea life, nature, it's all ahead of us, and we're just playing catch up. It's very interesting. About the turn of the last century, there was a French, I don't know if he was a biologist or a doctor, called René Quentin, and he discovered that blood plasma is almost identical to marine plasma. So in a rather daring move, people who are very sick, I don't know how he ever got permission to do this. I mean, he wouldn't be allowed today, but he started to inject very sick people who didn't have much chance of survival with seawater. And remarkably, within a short space of time, they turned their health around. In fact, even now today in pharmacies in Europe, in fact, you live in Europe, Emilio, you can still buy Quinton water, which is really interesting, after René Quinton. And there's still a sort of, I think his organization is called Quinton Academy or something like that, looking into medical treatments using seawater. So I think so much is going to be discovered about the sea in a way we've never understood it before, in terms of medicines, anti-aging technologies, healing. I think we're just at the very beginning of that deep dive, excusing the pun.
And not even that, but also new land masses emerging on the planet.
I get very excited about this because I have a really strong sense that some of the land masses from ancient Lemuria and Atlantis may start to reemerge. The frequency of those civilizations, but also the land itself. Because apparently with Lemuria, and you may know more about this than I do, Emilio, but with Lemuria, some floods came, and Hawaii is just the tip of the mountain that was left after the flood. So people started to migrate very quickly to different geographies, to Mount Shasta, to sort of Mauritius area, to somewhere around New Zealand. They took their culture and their frequency with them. And so I fully expect, in this increased year of seismic activity, that we will see some ancient land masses re-emerging. And just yesterday, I was reading, actually, I don't know when it was discovered, but I was reading that some crystal pyramids have been discovered off the coast of Florida. So I don't know when they were discovered, but that was, that's the whole Bermuda Triangle area, I think, and where planes and boats just sort of disappear, and there's a very different frequency. It's a vortex of energy there. So I fully expect, popping up, starting any time now, we will start to see new land masses emerging with much to teach us.
Wow. And I'm just getting goosebumps because last week we had Robert Grant back on, and we went on for 3 hours. And he actually pulled up a Forbes article. This is on Forbes. It's called The Shocking Doomsday Map of the World and the Billionaire Escape Plans. And it's all based on a prophecy given by Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. And you will see in those maps, I will actually leave the article so people can go to it, how Edgar Cayce predicted how the land masses will shift in the coming years because of the magnetic poles, north and south shifting as well. And right there is this new landmass to the west of Europe, which was what Atlantis would have been. And many people have confirmed that, channelers and also with seismic activity, we can see that there was a landmass there. And it's with the precessional cycles, time is moving backwards again to resurface those land masses again.
It's so exciting because one of the reasons I feel this is going to happen is because the dwarf planet Haumea, in one of the aspects of her symbolism, she is linked to the Hawaiian goddess of fertility, who was said to birth the 8 islands of Hawaii. There's 8 volcanic islands. So she can produce land from the sea. There's a kind of surging regenerative energy about her. And she's in a very strong position this year and next year because she's square to Pluto and Quincunx Sedna. So I fully expect transformation in the map of the Earth, how that looks. And I think we have a lot to look forward to. Edgar Cayce has been incredibly accurate in the past.
And from that astrological perspective, how far into the future are we looking when it comes to the shifting of the continents, of the landmass?
I think it's going to start this year. I think it's going to start this year and keep rolling for the next few years, I'd say. But this year, I would say, is the beginning of it, because partly because we are at the peak of solar cycle 25. These are 11-year sunspot cycles, and they have a peak roughly in the middle. Now, solar cycle 25 was supposed to peak in 2025, but there is so much activity coming from the sun, it's being pulled back in time, and we are peaking right now. So we're having a lot of M-class, X-class flares way ahead of what we'd ever anticipate in a normal year. And that is destabilizing the ionosphere. And because everything is connected, that is also having an effect on the iron and nickel core of the Earth, which is expanding. And because that's expanding, the crust of the Earth is more likely to crack. And so everything is connected. Now, partly the ionosphere is more unstable because of all the EMFs out there, the satellites. So some of this is natural cycles, some of it is unnatural. But nevertheless, whatever the cause, it is potentially creating more seismic activity. And, this can be wonderful in terms of new land masses, new species, new health discoveries, etc. But it also, of course, may be disruptive in some geographies. And because Uranus is the planet of earthquakes and is the planet of the unexpected, we can never actually predict it's going to be right there unless you're Edgar Cayce. So we'll see if he was right. Yeah.
Wow. And I'm curious to know why you've said that Earth is pivotal in raising the consciousness of the entire universe.
Yes, it's very interesting. I mean, that isn't so much astrological. I've just heard several people now whose spiritual judgment I very much respect, who have said that the Earth is the center because of our particular place in space, because of our resources, that we are central to the evolution of the entire galaxy. That galactic beings have said this. So that's why they're watching us so closely and cheering us on whenever we have a mass meditation. Say, come on, guys, you're getting there. And actually, I think even that wonderful channeler Daniel Scranton has mentioned that the Earth is pivotal in this evolutionary upgrade.
And we have a supermoon coming up in a couple weeks. If you would like to enlighten us on what is going on there.
Yeah, I mean that could bring up some new developments with the Earth, because you've got quite a lineup. You've got 5 planets in Taurus, which is the Earth, and this new supermoon. So that means the moon is very close to the Earth in its orbit. The sun and moon always together at a new moon. They are literally sort of 4 degrees from Uranus. and Uranus is still conjunct Jupiter. So potentially this can bring up some seismic activity. It doesn't have to. It can be politically seismic. It can be financially seismic. There could be some developments in digital currencies. That's the other aspect of this. We could see some more developments around food and farming and agriculture. I mean, it's so literal that there's so many farmers' protests across the world. Uranus is the planet linked to revolution and protest, and it's in Taurus, the sign of food and farming. I mean, it couldn't be simpler, it couldn't be clearer. So we could see a lot more development in that whole area of what's happening with the farmers and their clashes with governments across the world. And what's wonderful, certainly in the UK, I don't know if it's happening elsewhere, is there's a group called the People's Food and Farming Alliance, and they are gathering in a very Aquarian network to basically sell food, as used to happen, directly to the people, not via this third party of the supermarkets. And they've got themselves organized in a network. They have physical shops, they have online shops, they have delivery. They've really progressed incredibly fast using the Aquarian network model of coming together and communicating like mycelium. And they are, that's where we're headed. This is grassroots up, communities, collaborations, networks. That's where we're headed. So something could develop around that area, around this new moon. I think that's going to be very strong. And these supermoons just kind of keep on coming. So we will see what unfolds. But I expect things to get really even more lively from about July onwards.
Cancer time?
Yep. And also we've got that Uranus Mars aspect. Yep. And then we've got some very strong energy in August, September, October, November. Pluto retrogrades back to the last degree of Capricorn. And we have some remarkable aspects at the Republican convention date, exactly. That's in July, mid-July, and also at the Democratic convention date, which is in August. We've got really explosive astrology around about those two dates. So it will be fascinating to see what unfolds at those times, because the US election is a big deal. Whatever happens in the US tends to ripple across the rest of the world, but we're still in that Pluto return for the US, which is really a complete transformation, ultimately, of what and who the US is in values, the economy, finance, philosophy, politics, constitution, geography, which states make up the US, everything. It couldn't be bigger because it's the first time Pluto's come back to its natal position since 1776.
And from what I'm hearing from you, big themes that are going on right now are inner authority, sovereignty, breaking the patterns, breaking the old habits. Now, as we as a collective start coming back into our internal power, what would you advise for people going through all these different shifts and changes and cataclysms that we might see, or whatever it is? How would you bring people back into themselves and say, this is a great way to prepare for what's coming?
Yep, it's dropping into the breath regularly, shutting your eyes, dropping into the breath, and all the simple things I've recommended, bare feet on the grass to connect to the earth, to kind of decompress all that frazzled energy. Stay away from the news. There's great potential for mental overload and zuzzing. So stay away from, because particularly from May onwards, there is going to be so much information coming at us, absolute information overload. It's going to be very easy to be scattered in your energy. So just keep bringing self back to self. Hug a tree, close your eyes, drop into your breath, bare feet on the grass. Simple stuff that you can do alone for free. But also I'd suggest get into some kind of community, whether it's online or even better in person in your local area. So you know your neighbors, you know people around, so you form a resilience with that community. And also I'd say try and develop an attitude of this isn't happening to me, it's happening for me, because we are going through this accelerated period of evolution. And because things are going to be happening so quickly and there's been no rehearsal, it can give a feeling of kind of overwhelm. So just try and keep on thinking this is happening for me. And I'd also, and it's something I absolutely believe in my bones, that if we can stay in those very, stay contained, your center, your anchor. You don't have to go out and be angry and shouty and violent. Never advocate that. But if you can stay in those simple emotions of the coherence of love and joy and gratitude, to a large extent, I believe that you are bubble wrapped from the worst excesses of what's unfolding. You're aware of them unfolding in the world, but they're not actually coming to your door. And the reason I believe that is that you can only experience that which you are the frequency of. Everything in your life has to be a frequency match. And if you're not in fear, my strong belief is that is not going to land on your doorstep quite as violently. It's almost like we've all had I've used this analogy before, but we've all had the experience of taking off in a plane on a windy day. And at the lower altitudes, you're being very buffeted, quite scary. Once you break the cloud level, you have a smoother ride over the same geography. And so it's, if you can, if you substitute altitude for frequency, if you can stay at that higher frequency, your ride will be smoother than if you're in fear, because you're just going to be attracting more fearful things. So I'm a very simple being in that way. It isn't complicated, it's really simple things and practices and simple emotions. None of it is complicated. But if we can hold ourselves with discipline on those higher frequencies in simple ways, we will ride the wave more easily than we otherwise would have. And we will attract more people with momentum onto that higher timeline. That higher timeline already exists. We just need to step onto it. We don't even have to create it. It's there already. We just change our frequency and we're there.
Yeah. You talked about the Saturn in Pisces representing spiritual discipline and encouraging everyone to find that practice, that thing that you can always come back to every single day that will center you, that'll elevate your frequency. What is that for you? I'm curious about your own practices.
Yeah, I literally, I kind of walk my talk because I'm in nature every morning in the woods, non-negotiable. Hammering rain, gales. It's barely stopped raining in 7 months here. I'm out in that every day. I walk my talk because, it still nurtures you. Several times a day, particularly when it gets kind of overwhelmed buzzy here because I have busy days, I will deliberately shut my eyes and just drop into my breath. And I'll either imagine that I'm breathing in and out of the heart, or if I'm really zuzzy, I'll go into what I call the baby belly breath, which is shut your eyes and let the breath breathe you. Drop the breath into the belly. So you're breathing like a baby does. And very quickly, you'll slow your breath, deepen your breath, your cortisol levels drop, your immune markers, biomarkers raise. And even 2 or 3 minutes of that changes your state of being, literally. And I will do that 2 or 3 or 4 times a day. If I can, if there's a break in the rain, I'll go out and put bare feet on the grass and just out of the mind, get out of the mind and just drop into my heart and kind of merge with the trees and the blossom and the birds. And I'll just have this feeling of merging with nature, being one with nature. So out of the head, out of the to-do lists. I have long to-do lists, drop into the body, drop into the heart. So it's very simple things like that. I also do breath work every day. I've done yoga for about half a century, but I do Soma breath now, which is a combination of Buteyko and yoga and Wim Hof breath work, just quite vigorous. And I do that, again, non-negotiable every day. And I also, when I'm falling asleep at night, I go through a gratitude list, try and make it different every day. And when I'm waking up, I go through a gratitude list before I even start my day to welcome in the day. So I do all of those things every day, and they don't take long, and they're very simple, and they're for free, and everybody can do them. You don't have to read a book. You don't have to go on a course. Everybody can do them. Mm-hmm. Very simple.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those practices. I hope that people, at least one of those, they'll stick with. And it's all about breaking the habit of what we've been doing in the past so that we can repattern our life. And when we find new patterns, then we create new stories, we create new opportunities. And one of the questions that I know that you've asked many of your guests on your channel is, do you see this as the biggest jump for humanity
100%.
In our history? I'm curious to know what you have to say.
I mean, I sense it in my bones. I asked Dr. Jude Currivan that question because she's a visionary cosmologist, and she said absolutely 100%. I asked somebody else that. I think it was Jim Self. Yep. Yeah. And he said absolutely. So, I've asked people who I think have some authority and greater experience than me, and they say, yeah, absolutely 100%. And everybody I've heard talking about this evolutionary jump says the same. This is unique. So it'd be a shame to make a pig's ear of, this evolutionary jump. It's special.
Mm. Yeah. And Pam, we end every show with a segment called the Final Trio. But before that, I want just to leave people with a space to find you wherever you want to send people to connect with you further. We'll link everything that you want to share with us in the show notes so people can go directly to you and absorb more of your infinite wisdom.
Bless you. Thank you, Emilio. Yeah, really, if you go to pamgregory.com, that has all of my videos, my interviews, my updates. And also I do a whole series of short blogs every month. It's got my books there, my teaching videos, so you can get those there. My YouTube channel is super busy. It's Pam Gregory Astrology. There's also Pam Gregory Astrologer, who is the scammer. Don't go there. Pam Gregory Astrology. And it's really busy. I'm putting out probably, 5-6 videos a month, maybe more, and try and make it kind of new material every time. So, and new thinking. So, yeah, you can get a lot of free information there for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I love your channel a lot. So I really recommend people to go find it. And for the final trio, the first one I wanted to ask you is, what are the greatest truths that are being revealed right now that most of the population does not know about?
Who we are as humans. Who we are as humans, who we are as humanity. I think that's going to come as quite a shock. That we are way more powerful than we ever believed, we've ever been encouraged to believe. That, I think is going to be one of the biggest shocks, that all that we've ever understood to be true historically may not have been the case.
Who really are we as humans?
I think we're galactic beings. We are loving, benevolent galactic beings who have so much to offer in our infinite journey of the soul.
I love that. Beautiful. Second question is, what does a revolution of love look like in ourselves and in the world?
Wow. Yeah, because Dr. Jude Currivan talks a lot about this as well. I think it's, we typically think of a revolution as being very loud, with lots of, billboards and shouting and potentially quite violent and clashing. It's not like that at all. It's from the heart. And that the force of our love, our electromagnetic heart love, becomes like a tsunami. It becomes so powerful that we come together in coherence like a tsunami of love. It's a tsunami of very high frequency electrical energy lived from the heart. That because it's so high frequency, it changes the quantum wave structure for what we are attracting in our future. And that's happening already. That's unstoppable. I mean, there's no way anybody can stop that. And therefore, the old that you would have protested about in the old way just falls away, it just crumbles because there's no energy to it.
Thank you. You mentioned that astrology is pure potentiality. So I'm curious to know, what is the highest potential that you are seeing for humanity at this time period?
Wow. Yeah, I think our future, I know everything exists in the now and there really is no future, but we if we're still living partly in 3D, we have this sense of linearity, but what we are bringing in, I think, is quite unimaginable because it's never been lived before. I think it's a state of pure love for all living beings. It's a state of total harmony with all living beings. It's living in a frequency and recognizing everything cascades from that frequency. It's not probably consuming anything that you have to kill to eat because of the reverence you would have for all life. And it's just indescribably beautiful as a coherent, harmonious energy of love. And it's just that you're humming with love and a sense of oneness and being part of nature. That's the vision I have.
And I don't know if you remember from our first conversation, we did a little time capsule, and on top of the time capsule, you left a question behind for the next generation of leaders, which was, is your Dharma acting in the highest good for all? And I know that is a full yes for you. But I just wanted to let people know, what is your Dharma in your eyes and your perception, and how is it acting for the highest good for people?
Wow. Gosh, I think I was absolutely meant to be an astrologer in this lifetime. I've done it many times before. In other lifetimes, one I'm very familiar with. So I'm meant to do that, and astrology will always be my language, although I'm trying to go beyond that in some ways spiritually. But I hope to help people trust their hearts. I hope to help them trust their sovereignty. And I could not be doing more, time given, than to help them on their path to do that. And I don't want anything in return. I just want to help them in that journey. And if I can help in any small way with an understanding of astrology, I fulfilled my purpose on this earth. I fulfilled my Dharma. Big tick.
Pam, you are truly on a path of service, and it's taken me by shock, by awe, by wonder to meet such an open-hearted soul like you, and also the open-hearted souls that you attract. We even got a glimpse of the people that were commenting on our first conversation, the love that was felt and that rippled out into the field. So I appreciate you wholeheartedly. I would always love to continue our conversations. I'm recharged every time I see you, hear you, learn from you. So yeah, with all the love, Pam, thank you so much for being here today and providing us with all of this beautiful wisdom and information.
Well, I've loved the conversation, Emilio. I've really loved it. You asked some great questions. I'm constantly humbled by the amount of love that comes in, but you are at a very early stage in your journey. You have decades to go, and you are really rocking it already in terms of educating a very different group of people. And you're really helping to raise the frequency. Every conversation you have online, well, probably offline as well, but certainly every podcast you do will raise the frequency of your audience. So just know what you are doing to help others in this time too. And I've loved it. Thank you.
I received that, Pam. Aho, and till next time.
God bless.
All the blessings.
Love to you all.